The following program is presented by the Metropolitan Library Service Agency.
Hello, welcome to All About Kids, a program focusing on the interests of children and young people and some of the issues affecting them. Our guest today, Madeline Lengel, author of the Newbery Award-winning book A Wrinkle In Time and recipient of the 1990 Kerlan Award, presented annually by the University of Minnesota's Children's Literature Research Collection. Ms. Lengel will be interviewed by Irvyn Gilbertson of the University of Minnesota.
Madeline, we're so pleased to be having you here this afternoon, today. And we ask that you would be able to answer some of these questions. We hope that we can ask questions that will benefit the teachers and the children and the writers. Tell me, how did you first begin to start writing children's stories?
Well, Irvy, I don't write children's stories. I write stories.
All right.
And I first started to write stories when I was 5. And I've been writing stories ever since. But I don't ever write for an age group. I write a story.
So when you started writing, you just wanted to write stories?
Yes.
Did you know what type of story you wanted to write?
I wanted to write stories that were going to help me to find out what it meant to be a human being, why people do wonderful things and terrible things, why people hurt each other, why sometimes people sacrifice themselves. I wanted to find out what it is to be human. I wanted to find out some truth about living.
And that's generally what literature is.
Yes.
Yes. Now, you wrote Meet the Austins, which was published in 1960, and your Newbery Award-winning book was published in 1962. Meet the Austins is a realistic story, and A Wrinkle in Time is a fantasy, science fiction.
Oh, it's very realistic.
But there is a big leap between realism and fantasy. How did you make that leap?
Well, I wrote Meet the Austins as a Valentine present from my husband. And it was really about the things our family did. The kids in the book are not our children, but they live in our house and they do the things that we did. And so I started writing out of my own experience as a family person. In A Wrinkle in Time, I was delving a little bit deeper into writing about a universe that I could believe in, a universe created by a God of love. So it was, in a sense, moving beyond the ordinary facts of life to what things mean.
What would you give as a suggestion for people who want to write? Now, it's one thing to write a realistic story because you have the people around you to draw on, but to write fantasy is a little bit different.
Well, A Wrinkle in Time was my 11th book, not my first. It had taken me that much training in writing before I had enough technique to write a fiction that dealt with science. And if you're writing fantasy, the first thing you have to do is start out with absolute reality, with everything that's tangible. I mean, I start with the storm in the attic and then the food in the kitchen, things that we can identify with all 5 senses. And then when you're firmly grounded in reality, then you could say, yes, but what if, or suppose, and take off. But you start with what's real and tangible and recognizable.
A Wrinkle in Time has been censored occasionally. What are the objections to that book?
The objections come mostly from people who are literalists. They take everything on the absolute literal level without any idea that this might be saying a little bit more than the literal level can say. And also with absolutely no sense of humor whatsoever. And that's sad. We do need to, the more serious things are, the more we need to laugh. An example of the literal level versus the level of truth would be Jesus' story of the man who had the plank of wood in his eye and yet was conscious of the mote in his brother's eye. We're not supposed to believe that man had a plank of wood in his eye. It's not a factual, it's a true story about our own unwillingness to see our own most grievous faults and our willingness to see smaller faults in other people. So you have leapt from fact into truth. Jesus taught entirely by telling stories, and most of them are not factual. They're all true. So in A Wrinkle in Time, I was trying to write a true story about this universe. And because I go out into distant galaxies, because I have 3 guardian angels who move from being pure energy into putting on human flesh, and because I give them the funny names of Mrs. Whatsit, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Which, people assume they're witches. Well, they haven't read the book. There's no way they could be witches. They're angels.
I've heard one school system did not want to have it because they said evil was so evil. They did not want the children exposed to that much evil. Do you feel that there is that much evil in the book?
No, I don't feel there's that much evil in the book. I do believe that there is evil and that we need to give children a light against it rather than pretend it isn't there, so that when children face it, they're totally unprepared. I think we need to give them enough preparation and also enough confidence to know that love is stronger than evil, and that ultimately in A Wrinkle in Time, evil cannot withstand love. And I think that's a very important thing for us to know. I find it very sad that the people who criticize it are people who call themselves Christians, because for me it was a very deep affirmation of my faith.
You do some writing workshops in the
Yes.
schools. You're going to be traveling to some different places to do writing workshops. What do you do in those workshops?
Well, I will usually give an assignment. I'll give something to start off with. One thing that both children and adults respond to incredibly well is I have them take a piece of paper and write down a girl's name, fold it over, pass it on. A boy's name, fold it over, pass it on. He said, she said, and a place. And I say, write a story. And I've come up with some absolutely wonderful things, both from kids and from grown-ups, from that seemingly silly assignment. It simply opens up their imaginations.
You receive quite a bit of mail.
I get over 100 letters a week, and I do answer them.
And many of these are aspiring authors or authoresses?
No, I'd say most of them are wonderful readers who are responding, and who are responding with great affirmation and often telling me the story of their own lives. Some of the parallels in their lives to whatever it is, the book that they have just read. And of the thousands and thousands and thousands of letters I've got, there's less than a handful of negative ones. They're mostly wonderful.
Now, you have written other things than science fiction, fantasy, or realism. You have other books, many other books. What are some of the other genres that you write?
Well, I write ordinary novels. I started out, my first published books were just regular novels. And I write meditative books about being a woman and a mother and a human being and a writer. There are 8 or 9 of these. And I've written a couple of books of poetry and a couple of plays. I don't like to write 2 books of the same genre in a row because it'd be very easy to get repetitive. And so I like to move from one thing to another.
Do you think writing a different genre helps you to not get repetitive?
Yes, I do think it does.
Do you have to do research for all of your books?
I have to do a lot more research for the books which deal with post-Newtonian science than I do, say, for the family stories. The book I'm writing on now, I have to do a great deal of research into the world of 3,000 years ago, the world of King David and King David's wives, and what society. David took the Jews out of the Bronze Age into the Iron Age, and also the whole concept of one God among many gods into the God of the universe all happened and during David's reign. So I've had to do a lot of research in that area, which is lots of fun.
How do you do your research?
Mostly through books, but also I'm quite often very lucky in finding an expert. For instance, when I was writing The Arm of the Starfish, which is about marine biology, I worked with a marine biologist to set up the experiments I had my characters doing. And I'd like, even if I've done the research myself, to get somebody who's expert in that field to check it over to make sure that it is right. I've got to be accurate because kids will catch on immediately if you're not accurate. Maybe you can fool grown-ups. You can't fool kids. And also, I think you owe it to them to do the absolute best you can. You see, there's this weird idea that if you can write for grown-ups, you don't write for children, because it isn't good enough. I mean, that's not the real world. And it's easier to write for children. Well, it isn't. It's really a lot harder. I mean, I had to write my first grown-up books before I was good enough to write a book that was going to be marketed for kids. And I don't change in style or in vocabulary or in depth of characterization. I mean, when I write a book, all I'm doing is writing that book to the best of my ability.
One of your recent novels that has just come out is An Acceptable Time. Is that based on fact?
It's based on the fact that they're in the wonderful old stone walls in New England, they are finding stones with faint lines on them and little lines above, and it turns out that this is Ogham writing, which was an alphabet used by the Druids and the Celts 3,000 years ago. Very exciting to realize that there were on this continent people long before we thought they were coming over from England. So it's based on that fact, and I've had to do a lot of research into Druids and into the building of Stonehenge. And then it's family, too, the relationships between grandparents and a special grandchild, Polly.
Now, you have some books that you say are rather autobiographical.
All writing is autobiographical, no matter how much the writer may deny it. I mean, we have nothing to write out of except ourselves. I'm sometimes asked if my teenage protagonists are my daughters. Well, certainly they are not. I mean, I wouldn't presume to write out of my daughters. I'm the only adolescent I know that well. So I write out of myself. And I think all writers do.
But you do have some that are more specifically autobiographical?
Oh, A Circle of Quiet, which is my first nonfiction book, is a book that I wrote just as my children were growing up and getting ready to leave the nest. And it was about the struggles of trying to be a writer and trying to be a mother and trying to be a wife and trying to keep human. And I've made some wonderful friends from that book. I was very nervous about publishing it because it is a very vulnerable book. I mean, there I am. But I've had a wonderful response to it. And so I've gone on from there and have written, The Summer of the Great-Grandmothers, about my mother's 90th and last summer. And I get a lot of response from people. And more people have elderly parents as we're living older and older. And the problems of caring for our elderly parents is a big problem. So I still get a lot of mail response on that book. And then I wrote a book about my marriage, a very volatile 40-year marriage to a wonderful man who also happened to be an actor. And I guess his best-known role was as Dr. Charles Tyler on All My Children. And I'm still getting lots of mail on that. So the personal books evoke a lot of personal response, and that's lovely.
Do you think there's more personal response because people identify with it more?
Yes, I think so. I was asked a while ago what I thought my books did that was important. I said, well, what I think I do is I just say the little ordinary things that don't seem very important but that need to be said. And people respond to that. I get a lot of letters saying, you're writing what I feel and I haven't been able to articulate it, and thank you for doing it for me.
Do you feel you have written your best book yet?
Oh, I hope not. I mean, each time I write a book, I hope it's going to be better than the one before, and I have a lot of books left I would like to write. One of my sons-in-law says that one day I'll be found dead on top of the typewriter, and that's fine. About 15 or 20 books from now.
You have a book that is going to come out this fall of 1990.
Oh, I do. I have a book with the most marvelous illustrator any writer could hope for. It's the 13th century Italian painter Giotto, who did 24 magnificent paintings of the life of Christ. They're wonderful and they're strong. And I was asked to do a text to go with them. And I was very excited at this challenge. And then one of the editors said, now we see this as a children's book. And I said, wait, I don't know how to write a children's book. I got this very funny look, and I said, I don't. I just write a book. And if you have to write a children's book about Jesus, that means you don't think they can cope with the real Jesus. Now just let me write a book. And so they very kindly let me write a book, and they're quite excited about it, and I'm quite excited about it, and the pictures are just beyond belief gorgeous. And physically, it's going to be a beautiful book.
Do you have an editor? Do you feel that there are editors that are better than other editors?
Oh yes, and I have been very, very lucky in that I have editors who push and poke and punch and pull until they have dragged out of me the best book they can possibly drag out of me. I will sometimes, after a conversation with an editor, say, Stephen, that was a very radical suggestion. Do you realize that was a radical suggestion? You say, well, I think so. I say, do you realize that's at least 6 months more work of radical? And I'll go back for 6 months more work. And I like to do that. I mean, I want to do the best book I can do, and I'm grateful to have editors who will really push me so that I will revise and revise and revise.
Would you revise on your own without the editor?
I do revise on my own, but an editor in a way is a shortcut. An editor will help me to know more quickly than I might myself where a part of a book sags, where a scene doesn't work. For instance, in this big novel I'm working on now, I feel that I've been given this enormous piece of granite and a little tiny chisel and a little tiny hammer, and I'm tapping away, finding the book that's in there. And sometimes he'll see further than I will see, and just give me some clues.
Do you think, as a teacher of children that would be teaching them writing, you can help children in that way? Do you edit?
When I teach children, I don't teach any differently than when I teach adults. One of the odd things that I always say is, when you write, don't think. Write. Because writing is an act of focused listening. You're listening to your story just the same way you listen to a friend who's telling you something important. And you're not thinking, you're listening. I think before I write, I think after I write, but when I write, I don't write. I don't think, I just write. And I always give a time limit, 15 minutes if it's in a school. You may not write for more than 15 minutes, if this is what I want you to do. So sometimes if you're working within a time limit, that's freeing rather than restrictive. If it's a writer's workshop where people are staying overnight, I will say, not more than an hour. That's, if you're not through, too bad, stop. But people are usually through.
But you don't write that way.
Well, I don't give myself time limits because I just don't have enough time. I mean, the idea of having uninterrupted time to myself to write is almost unbelievable. I live with my granddaughters who are going to college, the kids in and out of the house all the time, and so I just grab any time I can and I write.
You don't have time to sit down in the morning and write until noon or something like that?
Very seldom. I was writing on the plane yesterday, and I had a lot of time to write since my plane was canceled, and I had to get on another plane that sat in O'Hare for an hour, and I had that full hour extra to write. In a hotel room, I don't have to make the bed. I don't have to prepare the meals. So that's a good place to write too. I don't have to run the vacuum cleaner. But I write every day. Somehow or other, I write something every day, even if it's only my journal.
When you're writing, do you still journal?
Yes. I don't journal every day. I would say I average 4 times a week, probably, because there are days I'm just so full of the book I can't do anything else.
Is that when you're listening?
I'm listening all the time when I'm writing.
But when you're not writing, are you thinking about it?
Oh, I write all the time. Between 6 and 7, my husband used to listen to the news and I would play the piano. Then he would come, we'd go out to the kitchen and talk while I prepared dinner. And every once in a while I'd hear him saying, "Darling, are you writing?" And I'd realize I hadn't said a word for about 8 or 9 minutes, and yes, I had been writing. I said, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry." He said, "Go on, it's all right, go on, write." So you write all the time. Your mind is listening to the story. Now, I do get the meals on the table on time.
Now, when you say you're listening to the story, do you put your characters down before you start the story, or do you meet your characters as you're writing about them?
When I start the story, I know who my characters are. But during the writing of the story, they do all kinds of things I don't expect. They say things I didn't expect them to say, and I've talked with many writer friends, we all have the same experience, that our characters know more about themselves than we know, and we do well to listen to them and go where they want to go.
Do you know the ending before you start?
Yes, I usually know that I want to go from here to here. I'm never quite sure how I'm going to get there, but that is usually where I go. I have an idea of what the general overall theme of the story is going to be.
So you do have some sort of an outline of the story before you start?
Well, I don't outline it on paper.
No, but
I have an idea in my mind. Well, when I start a book, I've usually been thinking about it off and on through the writing of half a dozen other books. I mean, the idea for the book I'm working on now is at least 6 years old. So it's been in my subconscious mind sort of slowly cooking away while I haven't been paying any attention to it. And that's a nice thing about books, that you put them into your subconscious mind and they just bubble away there. And then when you're ready for them, they're ready for you.
So you have several others that you're still that are still bubbling
Oh,
away.
yes, yes.
And how do you know when a story is ready to come out?
It usually insists on coming out. For instance, I was working on a novel which has been put aside when I got the idea for Many Waters, the book about Meg's twins, Sandy and Dennis. And I got the idea, I was at a science fiction convention in California, came back and went back to the novel, and I couldn't write it, and I suddenly realized I've got to write Many Waters, and so that's what I did. It just insisted that it get written.
Well, there are many ideas that you can use. How do you choose which one you want to use?
I'm not sure I do the choosing. I think the book does the choosing. Now, this is not as sort of misty as it sounds. I do believe that a work of art has its own identity. For instance, Michelangelo took a huge piece of granite that had been rejected by the other sculptors because he saw the statue of David inside it and had to release it. But that statue was there for Michelangelo to see. He was the one who saw it, but it was there. And I think most artists feel that way, that the work is there and our job is to be the servant and to release it.
Do you think people can recognize that in others or in themselves, that there's a story there that needs to come out?
Yes, I think everybody has at least one full story. And there are some one-book writers who tell their story and that's it. Most of us have more than one story to tell, and that's what we feel we have to do. I know I'm very lucky that I knew as young as I did that what I wanted to do was to write stories. And I have been very blessed in being able to do that all my life.
Did you ever get discouraged about writing stories?
Oh, indeed I did. I had my first few books published with half a dozen books, but no trouble, lots of success. Then I went through over 10 years, the decade of my 30s and into my 40s, when I couldn't sell anything. And it was miserable. And it was during that time that I wrote A Wrinkle in Time and thought, well, this is the best thing I have ever written. I mean, I really think I've made a real stride, and nobody wanted it. You cannot name a major publisher who didn't reject it. They all did. And I did get discouraged. I did begin to lose faith. I began to wonder, did I not get it down on paper, what I saw? On my 40th birthday, that was right towards the end of this long period of rejections, I was in my workroom, which is over the garage, and I had a book out that I knew was close to being accepted, and it got rejected. And so I decided that was a message that I was supposed to learn to make pie crust. And so I covered my typewriter with a great gesture of renunciation and was walking up and down my little workroom, tears streaming down my cheeks. And I stopped in my tracks because what was my subconscious mind doing? It was blip, 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 blinking up the plot of a novel on failure. So I uncovered my typewriter, and in my journal that night I wrote, I'm a writer. And that's who I am. And even if I'm never, ever published again, and I had to accept at that point that I might never be published again, I have to write. That's what I have to do. And I'm very glad I made that commitment in the pits, in the moment of total failure, because it's easy to say you're a writer when your things are going well. It wasn't easy then, and so it was very real.
Do you have any novels right now that are coming beyond David and The Glorious Impossible?
Well, at the end of An Acceptable Time, the most recent book, I have this recurring character called Zachary Gray, who's a brilliant, handsome, charming, spoiled, rotten, no-good young man. And in An Acceptable Time, he hits bottom. And I think he's like an alcoholic. Now that he's hit bottom, maybe there's a chance for him. And I suspect I'm going to have to write a book in which I give Zachary a chance.
Sounds like we're going to have some interesting novels coming forth. You said you were a child when you started to write. Did you know at that time that you were going to be a writer all your life, or did you just think you wanted to write part-time?
Oh, I wanted to be a writer and a painter and a pianist and an actress. I had sense enough not to want to be a ballet dancer. And I was an actress. I do play the piano. I gave up painting when I had my first child. But I realized as I grew older that you have to focus on one thing. And it was apparent that my one thing needed to be writing. but I love playing the piano. That's for me a very, it opens things up for me very much. And I enjoyed my work in the theater. I had a lot of fun. I enjoyed the community of a company. I met my husband in the cherry orchard. I married him in the joyous season. And it was a wonderful time in my youth. And it was also a wonderful school for me as a writer to hear words. To see a writer, when a play was on out of town trying out, come down in the morning looking terrible, but there was a whole brand new scene, and I began to learn about revision, and that things can be thrown out, that not every word is a precious pearl, that you can dump them and start all over again. So I learned a lot.
Have you discovered that revision does not mean a rejection of you? Some people feel that if they have to revise, then the teacher is, or the editor is saying, I don't like you because this work is not what I was looking for.
Revision is something that you learn to do as you grow up. I don't think it comes naturally. And when I'm working with little kids, I don't require revision. I think they're just groping with their craft, groping to find words, groping to know how to set down events. And that revision comes as you learn more about writing. And I don't think too much revision, in story that is, should be expected of the very little ones. By the time I got into high school, I knew enough about writing to know that I could revise things. And revision was for me always an affirmation that my teacher found the story important enough to be worth revising. So rather than a rejection, I find it an affirmation.
Well, I'm so happy that you could be here with us today, and I want to thank you for your time. I hope this will be helpful to all the students and teachers and parents that are able to view it.
Oh, I hope so too. You are a wonderful interviewer.
Thanks to Madeline Lengel, Newbery Award winner and 1990 Kerlan Award winner. Thank you also to Irvyn Gilbertson, our interviewer.
Captain Snap and the Children of Vinegar Lane by Roni Schotter. Captain Snap is a bitter old man who lives in a ramshackle house in a junkie yard at the end of Vinegar Lane. The local children generally avoid him, but whenever they're feeling especially twitchy, they call on Captain Snap. The littlest, Sodi, calls out to Captain Snap while the others hide. Captain Snap obliges by coming out on his porch and snapping his fingers. The children laugh and all scamper away. One day, however, when the children call on Captain, he does not appear. The children learn that Captain Snap is ill. They run home, gather up some blankets and a pot of stew to bring back to Captain Snap. He weakly tells the children to scat, and the children stay away for a whole week this time. When they return, Captain Snap is nowhere to be found. They bravely enter his house to check on him and are greeted by all sorts of wondrous inventions that crowd his little house. Captain Snap appears on the scene, mumbles a low thank you to the children, and then proceeds to create a wonderful thingamajig for each child to take home. From that day on, Captain Snap is known as Captain Scrap, artist of Vinegar Lane. All the village people regularly stop in to see Captain Snap, listen to his salty stories, and help him create new and marvelous inventions. The author offers many vivid descriptions and rich characterizations that are not often found in a picture book format. The illustrations are crayon on black canvas and give the effect of woodcuts. They're colorful, rich, and full of detail. There's a fresh and exciting feel to the book. This is a wonderful choice for the 5 to 8 crowd as it makes a terrific read aloud.
Captain Snap and the Children of Vinegar Lane by Roni Schotter, reviewed by Wendy Woodfill, Children's Services Librarian at the Minnetonka Community Library. Thanks for joining us on All About Kids. Please tune in again.
This has been a presentation of Hennepin County Library in conjunction with the Twin Cities Metropolitan Library Service Agency.